The first thing Claire noticed was the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes with peace, but the kind that stretches too long, making the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The air inside the old rental house in Blackwood, Pennsylvania, felt dense, thick with something she couldn't name. She paused at the threshold, her fingers tightening around the handle of her overnight bag. This was supposed to be a fresh start. A new town, a new job, a new home, except home didn't usually come with boarded-up windows and a front door that looked like it had been forced open before. The real estate agent had assured her it was a charming fixer-upper, but standing here now, Claire could already tell that was a lie. The house wasn't just old, it felt abandoned in a way that went beyond time. Like someone had left in a hurry and never planned on coming back. The moment she stepped inside, the floor groaned beneath her weight, the sound echoing through the empty hall. The air was stale, carrying the scent of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic. A single naked bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly as if someone had just brushed past it. That's when she saw it. A note, sitting in the center of the kitchen table, weighted down by a rusted key. Her stomach twisted. The real estate agent hadn't mentioned anything about a previous tenant. Had they left this behind? Slowly, she moved forward, her pulse hammering against her ribs as she unfolded the yellowed paper. The writing was jagged, almost frantic. Do not stay past midnight. Her breath hitched. The ink was smeared, the paper creased as if it had been clutched too tightly before being left behind. A chill spread through her, creeping up her spine like icy fingers. Claire glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of the house's shadows, the way they pooled in the corners like something alive, something waiting. She swallowed hard and tried to push down the unease tightening in her chest. It was just a prank. A joke left by some local kid trying to scare the new girl in town. But then something shifted upstairs. A creak. Soft, subtle, but unmistakable. Claire froze. The house was supposed to be empty. She hadn't seen any cars outside, hadn't heard a single sound before now. Slowly, she reached for her phone, fingers trembling as she flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the peeling wallpaper, the old staircase leading up to the second floor. Another creak, this time closer. Her breath came faster now, her grip on the phone tightening. She should leave. Get in her car, drive to the nearest hotel, and figure things out in the morning. But something about the note, about the eerie weight of the silence, made her hesitate. Then the light flickered. Just for a second. A blink of darkness before the bulb steadied again. But in that split second, she saw it. A figure at the top of the stairs. Motionless. Watching. Claire's blood ran cold. She bolted for the door, but before she could reach it, the light above her shattered. Glass rained down in sharp, glittering shards, scattering across the wooden floor. Claire shielded her face, her pulse roaring in her ears as she reached for the doorknob, her fingers fumbling. She twisted it hard, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. No. No, no, no. She had just walked through this door. It had been open. Had someone locked it from the outside? She turned back toward the staircase, her body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. The figure was still there, standing in the shadows at the top of the stairs. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Her phone flashlight wavered in her trembling hand as she aimed it at the figure. The beam barely cut through the darkness, illuminating only the edges of a shape, tall, slightly hunched, with shoulders that seemed unnaturally sharp. A feeling of absolute wrongness radiated from it, pressing into her chest like a weight. Who's there? Claire's voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, a low, rasping inhale. The breath was wet, rattling, like lungs struggling to pull in air through something thick and viscous. It was the sound of something that wasn't supposed to be alive, but somehow was. Claire took a step back, heart hammering against her ribs. I'm calling the police. The figure didn't react. It just stood there, breathing, exhaling another ragged, sickening sound that sent a wave of nausea through her. Her phone slipped in her sweaty grip. She swiped at the screen, trying to dial 911, but the signal was gone. A single, empty bar blinked mockingly in the corner. The breath at the top of the stairs hitched, then came faster. Claire didn't wait. She pivoted, sprinting toward the back of the house, searching for another way out. Her shoes skidded over broken glass, but she pushed forward, nearly crashing into the kitchen counter. There, a back door. She grabbed the knob, twisting, yanking. Locked. A loud thud came from the stairwell. She spun just in time to see the figure move, jerky, unnatural, shifting forward like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Its head tilted, just slightly, as if it was studying her reaction. A chill slammed into Claire's spine. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then, suddenly, the breathing stopped, and the house plunged into absolute darkness. The darkness swallowed her whole. Claire stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps, ears straining for any sound. A deep, oppressive silence had fallen over the house, thick and suffocating, like the air itself had been sucked from the room. The weight of unseen eyes pressed on her from the shadows. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They came from above, moving toward the stairs. A floorboard creaked, followed by another. Claire backed away, her hands searching blindly for anything she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around the cold handle of a cast-iron skillet left on the stove. She lifted it, her arms shaking under its weight. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Claire swung the flashlight wildly, the beam slicing through the blackness. But the figure was gone. Only the empty stairwell remained, leading up to the second floor. A soft whisper brushed against her ear. Not words, just a sound. A presence. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. Then something grabbed her wrist. The grip on Claire's wrist was ice cold. A violent jolt shot through her body as fingers, thin and unnaturally strong, clamped down on her skin. She gasped, wrenching herself backward, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. The flashlight slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the floor and spinning wildly, its beam slicing through the darkness in erratic flashes. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. She swung the cast-iron skillet instinctively, striking blindly at whatever had grabbed her. The heavy metal connected with something, a dull, wet thunk, and for a split second, there was silence. Then a sharp, guttural exhale. The thing released her. Claire staggered backward, panting. The flashlight stopped spinning, its beam landing at an angle that illuminated the wooden floor in front of her, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no figure, no one. Her wrist throbbed where the icy grip had held her. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the slight indentation where fingers had curled too tightly, the skin raw and tingling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Get out. Get out now. Claire darted for the kitchen door again, yanking at the handle. It was still locked, still refusing to budge. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood, her mind racing. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. She hadn't locked them. Someone or something had. Her phone. She spun, grabbing it off the counter, but when she looked at the screen, her stomach dropped. The device was off. Not dead, just off. She pressed the power button, frantically trying to turn it back on, but nothing happened. It was as if the battery had been yanked out. The house was swallowing her whole. Her eyes darted toward the stairwell. It loomed like an open mouth in the dim light, stretching into complete blackness. The air had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was waiting. And then she heard it. A whisper. It wasn't coming from the stairs this time. It was closer, right behind her. Claire turned slowly, pulse hammering in her throat. A voice, barely audible. A breath of sound that made her skin crawl. You shouldn't be here. The whisper came from the shadows at the edge of the kitchen. She couldn't see anything, but she felt it. The presence. The weight of it pressing down on her chest like invisible hands. Claire took a step back. Her heel crunched over shattered glass. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. Who's there? She whispered, though she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. Silence. And then, footsteps. Not upstairs. Not across the room. Right next to her. A single floorboard creaked, the sound impossibly close. The whispering breath was at her ear again. Run. The flashlight flickered and went out. The house plunged into darkness. She did the only thing she could. She ran. Blindly, desperately, she pushed forward, her arms outstretched to keep from slamming into anything. The room was a black void, every sense heightened to unbearable levels. She could hear everything: her own breathing, the rapid thud of her pulse, the creak of the old house shifting around her. Something was behind her. She didn't need to see it. She felt it. The thick, suffocating weight of it, moving in the dark, closing the distance between them. Her shoulder clipped the edge of the kitchen table, pain sparking up her arm, but she didn't stop. She could barely tell where she was going, but her feet found the hallway, then the narrow entrance to the living room. The front door. Claire slammed into it, her hands fumbling over the knob, twisting and pulling. It didn't move. She shoved her shoulder against it, trying to force it open, but it may as well have been made of stone. Behind her, the floorboards creaked. It was closer now. The presence. The thing that whispered. That watched. A shuddering breath rasped through the room. Claire turned, pressing her back against the door. Her eyes had adjusted slightly to the dark, and now she could just barely make out the shape in the living room. A silhouette. Motionless. Waiting. It stood just beyond the reach of the dim moonlight filtering through the boarded-up windows. Tall, unnaturally thin. Its head tilted in that eerie, calculating way, as if studying her. And then it took a step forward. Claire choked back a scream. Her fingers scrabbled against the door, trying to find anything that could help. Please. She didn't know if she was talking to it or just praying to whatever god might be listening. The figure took another step. The moonlight caught it just enough for her to see. Its face was wrong. Distorted. Stretched in a way that shouldn't be possible. The skin was too pale, too smooth, as if it had been molded from something not human. The mouth too wide, lips thin and cracked, curved into a slow, unnatural smile. Claire's entire body went rigid. It lifted one skeletal hand and pointed. Not at her. At the clock on the wall. The old grandfather clock she hadn't noticed before. The one in the corner of the living room, covered in dust, the glass cracked. The minute hand clicked into place. 12 a.m. Midnight. A whisper curled through the air, threading through her ears, settling into her bones. Too late. The lights in the house exploded. A soundless blast, bulbs shattering, glass raining down from above. The room plunged into a different kind of darkness. Not empty, not silent, full of movement. Shadows detached from the walls. Shapes wrong, distorted, crawled from the floor. The whispers turned into voices. Many voices. Murmuring, laughing, crying. The house came alive. And Claire screamed. The scream ripped from Claire's throat, but the house swallowed it whole. The darkness wasn't just around her, it was moving. Writhing. A living, breathing entity that stretched and pulsed with unnatural energy. Shadows slithered across the walls, twisting into distorted shapes, crawling toward her. The voices surrounded her now. Some whispering, some sobbing, some laughing in a way that made her skin crawl. Too late. Too late. Too late. Claire's heart pounded violently in her chest. She scrambled away from the advancing darkness, her back hitting the wall. The door was locked. The windows were boarded. There was nowhere to go. Then, the clock chimed. A low, hollow sound that echoed through the house, vibrating deep in her bones. Midnight. The exact time the note had warned her about. Claire clenched her fists, her breathing ragged. She had two choices: stand there and let whatever was happening consume her, or fight. She chose to fight. In one swift movement, she grabbed the closest object she could find, a metal fireplace poker resting by the hearth. It felt solid, real, something to ground her in the madness unfolding around her. The shadows recoiled at her movement, shifting unnaturally, as if surprised. Stay back, Claire shouted, brandishing the poker in front of her. Her voice was raw with fear, but she didn't let it waver. I don't know what the hell is going on here, but I'm not going down without a fight. The laughter stopped. For a moment, the house listened. Then, something changed. A thud sounded upstairs. A heavy, deliberate sound, like footsteps, but wrong. The kind of steps that dragged, scraped, as if something that didn't quite know how to walk was trying to make its way toward her. The air thickened, charged with static, making her skin prickle. Claire tightened her grip on the poker, her muscles coiled. The footsteps grew closer. A sudden, sharp knock pounded against the front door. Claire nearly dropped the poker, her entire body jerking at the sound. Someone real, was outside. A second knock, more urgent. Claire spun toward the door, hesitating only a second before lunging forward and fumbling with the locks. Her fingers shook as she twisted the deadbolt, yanked at the chain. The footsteps on the stairs were at the landing now. Something was coming. The knocking became a pounding. "Claire, open the door." A voice, a real, human voice. Her breath caught. How did they know her name? The thought barely had time to register before she wrenched the door open. A rush of cold night air hit her face, the contrast against the suffocating heat inside making her gasp. Standing on the porch was a man. Tall, mid-30s, dark hair disheveled, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. His chest heaved, his face etched with urgency. "Get out of the house," he said, grabbing her wrist. His grip was firm, grounding. Now, before Claire could react, the thing inside the house let out a sound that wasn't human. A guttural, rasping growl. Claire's entire body locked up as she turned slowly. The figure stood at the base of the stairs. Closer now, fully illuminated in the dim moonlight filtering through the broken window. And Claire finally saw it. It had no face. Her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. The figure was tall, hunched, its skin smooth and stretched tight over its skull. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just an empty, featureless void where a face should have been. And yet, it was watching her. The shadows at its feet twisted and pulsed, moving like liquid, stretching toward her. Claire felt like she couldn't breathe. She had to run. The man on the porch pulled at her wrist, snapping her out of her paralysis. "Move." Her body obeyed before her mind could catch up. She bolted through the doorway, nearly tripping over the threshold. The man yanked her forward, slamming the door shut behind them. A deafening silence fell. The night air was shockingly cold, burning against her skin. Her breath came in heavy gasps as she stumbled down the porch steps. The town was still, too still. The man didn't stop running. He pulled her down the long, empty driveway toward an old black SUV parked at the curb. The moment they reached it, he flung the driver's side door open and shoved her inside. Claire barely had time to register the leather seats, the scent of stale coffee, before he slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life. Her heart was still slamming against her ribs. She turned to him, trying to piece together what just happened. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer right away. His hands were tight on the wheel, his knuckles white. His eyes flicked toward the house in the rearview mirror. Then he said, low and urgent, "Did you see it?" Claire shuddered. "The thing inside?" The man nodded. His jaw clenched. "It saw you too." Something in his tone made the hairs on her arms rise. "What does that mean?" she whispered. The man exhaled sharply. "It means you're in a lot of trouble." The SUV peeled away from the curb, tires screeching against the pavement. Claire turned, watching as the house disappeared into the distance. The boarded windows, the flickering porch light. Then, the faceless figure stepped onto the porch. It watched them leave. Even without eyes, Claire knew it was staring right at her. Claire's pulse pounded as the SUV sped down the empty road, the wind roaring past the windows. Her hands were trembling, still clenched in fists against her lap. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. The strange house, the locked doors, the note, the faceless figure. She turned to the man gripping the wheel, his jaw set, his knuckles white. Who was he? And more importantly, how did he know her name? "Start talking," she demanded, voice sharper than she intended. "Who the hell are you?" The man exhaled through his nose, eyes locked on the road ahead. "Name's Ethan Hale." That name rang a bell, faint, distant, like something from a past life. Claire narrowed her eyes. "Am I supposed to know you?" Ethan hesitated, his grip tightening on the wheel. "We met once," he admitted. "A long time ago." A chill that had nothing to do with fear ran through Claire's body. "I don't remember that." Ethan finally glanced at her. "You wouldn't. You were a kid." The weight of those words sent a ripple of unease through her. Why would she have met him as a child? What did he mean? She turned back toward the road, taking in their surroundings for the first time. The winding road cut through dense forest, the trees looming like silent spectators. No houses, no signs, just darkness and asphalt stretching endlessly ahead. "Where are we going?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He reached over, pulled open the glove compartment, and tossed her something small and cool to the touch. Claire caught it on reflex. A phone. "Call the real estate agency," he instructed. "Ask about the house." Claire stared at him, then at the phone. "You think I haven't already? I rented it online." "The agent. Call." Ethan interrupted, voice low. "I'll bet you anything there won't be a record of it." Claire's throat tightened, but she pressed the call button anyway. The line rang. And rang. And rang. Finally, a robotic voice crackled through. "This number is no longer in service." Her stomach dropped. She checked the listing in her email, clicking the contact link. Error. Page not found. Panic rose like bile. She had wired money for this rental. She had signed a lease. She had been speaking to a woman named Madeline Walsh for weeks. She tried calling again. Same dead tone. "That's not possible," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tensed. "That house? It doesn't exist on any official record. No one's owned it for decades." Claire shook her head. No, that wasn't possible. She had walked through it. She had unlocked the door herself. But then she remembered the note. The way the doors had locked behind her. The creeping sense that something had been off from the start. "What's going on?" she asked, voice shaking. Ethan hesitated again, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. His expression darkened. "You were lured there." Claire's blood ran cold. "By who?" Silence. Then Ethan muttered, almost to himself, "Not who." "What?" The SUV veered onto a side road, kicking up gravel as Ethan pulled off onto a narrow dirt path. They rolled to a stop beneath the overhang of towering trees, the world around them eerily silent. Claire turned to him. "Explain. Now." Ethan ran a hand down his face. "Look," he said. "I didn't want to drag you into this. But if you were in that house, you're already in deep." Claire's patience snapped. "Into what?" He exhaled heavily. "You ever heard of Blackwood experiments?" The name sent a faint chill through her. Blackwood, the town she had just moved to. She frowned. "No." Ethan rubbed his temples. "You should have." He turned, leveling her with a serious look. "Because you were born there." Claire blinked. The words didn't register. "What?" "You're not from Philadelphia, Claire," Ethan said, voice calm but firm. "You were born in Blackwood. You spent the first 4 years of your life there before your parents took you and ran." Her chest tightened. That wasn't right. She had memories of Philadelphia. A normal childhood. School. Birthday parties. But there were gaps. Vague, fragmented images. A different house. The sound of static on an old radio. Whispers behind doors she wasn't allowed to open. She forced herself to focus. "What the hell does that have to do with the house?" Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel. "Because whatever your parents ran from, it never stopped looking for you." Claire's breath hitched. A sharp beep echoed through the car. Ethan's phone. His face paled as he glanced at the screen. Unknown number. The call disconnected before he could answer. Then, a message appeared. A single line of text. "You shouldn't have taken her." Claire's stomach lurched. "Who is that?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "The people who don't want you asking questions." A low rumble filled the silence. Claire turned toward the road. A pair of headlights had appeared in the distance, and they were coming straight for them. The headlights closed in fast. Ethan swore under his breath and slammed the SUV into reverse, tires skidding over loose gravel as he spun the wheel. The black sedan barreling toward them was no ordinary vehicle. Its high beams glared like twin white-hot suns, cutting through the thick forest like a blade. Claire's pulse pounded. "Who the hell is that?" "Not someone we want to talk to," Ethan growled. The sedan accelerated. It was gaining on them. Ethan twisted the wheel sharply, the SUV jerking violently as he veered off the narrow dirt path and plowed into the trees. Branches snapped, leaves scraped against the windows, but the heavy vehicle kept moving, bouncing over the uneven ground. The sedan didn't slow down. It followed. "They're not stopping." Claire gritted her teeth, gripping the door handle as the SUV swerved wildly. "They won't," Ethan shot back. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, his fingers tightening on the wheel. "They don't need you alive, Claire. They just need to make sure you don't ask any more questions. Her stomach turned. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, just more trees, stretching endlessly. Ethan gritted his teeth, pushed the accelerator harder. The sedan pulled up alongside them, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but black. And then, a figure inside turned toward them. Claire caught a glimpse of its face, and her blood ran cold. It was wrong, stretched too tight over sharp bones, skin pale, mouth too wide. And where its eyes should have been, black voids, like the figure in the house. Her breath hitched. Ethan, I see it. His jaw clenched. The sedan jerked right, slammed into them. The impact sent Claire flying against the door, her seatbelt digging into her ribs. Ethan struggled for control, tires screeching over wet ground. The sedan hit them again, harder this time. Hold on, Ethan shouted. The SUV lurched sideways, skidding toward a steep drop-off. Claire barely had time to scream before the SUV went over the edge and plunged into darkness. The world spun violently. Claire barely registered the sound of branches snapping, metal twisting, glass shattering. The SUV tumbled downward, flipping once, twice before crashing to a stop with a jarring, metallic shriek. Then, silence. For a moment, Claire didn't move. Couldn't. Pain shot up her arm. Her head throbbed. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and blood. Ethan groaned beside her, slumped forward, his hands still gripping the wheel. Claire's breaths came in shaky bursts. Ethan. No response. Her fingers fumbled with the seatbelt, unclipping it with shaking hands. She reached for Ethan's shoulder, gently shaking him. He stirred, blinking hard. Yeah, I'm here. His face was slick with blood, a gash running along his forehead, but his eyes were clear, focused. The car, Claire whispered, turning toward the road above. Did they? But the sedan was gone. Just gone. No headlights. No movement. As if it had never been there. A cold chill crawled down Claire's spine. They just vanished, she whispered. Ethan wiped at the blood on his face, his jaw tight. No. They left because they think we're dead. He shifted, testing his movement, then cursed under his breath. We have to go. If they realize we survived, they'll come back to finish the job. Claire swallowed hard. Her brain screamed for answers, but one thing was clear, whoever was after her wasn't human. They climbed out of the wreckage. The SUV was totaled. The windshield was shattered, the hood crushed, smoke curling from the wreckage. Ethan winced as he moved, favoring his left side. Claire's knees shook beneath her, but she forced herself forward. Where do we go? Ethan glanced around, then nodded toward a faint glow in the distance, lights. There's a gas station about a mile from here, he muttered. We need to get there. Figure out our next move. The forest stretched endlessly, towering pines shrouded in mist. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes, every rustle of leaves sent her nerves on edge. Claire's mind raced. Back in the car, she whispered, stepping in stride with Ethan, you said my parents ran from Blackwood. Why? Ethan's pace didn't slow, but his expression darkened. Because people started disappearing. Claire's heart skipped. What do you mean? Ethan exhaled sharply. In the early 90s, Blackwood was part of an off-the-books government project. A research town. Small, controlled. No one in, no one out unless authorized. The perfect test ground. Claire felt a chill creep into her bones. Test ground for what? Ethan hesitated. Then, cognitive weaponry. She stopped walking. Excuse me? Ethan turned toward her. The government was experimenting with neural manipulation, rewiring memories, implanting thoughts, controlling behavior. The human mind as a weapon. Claire's stomach turned. They started with volunteers, Ethan continued. Soldiers. Prisoners. But that wasn't enough. They needed entire populations to test on. Claire's head spun. Her entire childhood, had it been a lie? But she stammered. That's illegal. Yeah. Ethan's jaw tightened. It is. Claire's breathing hitched. What does this have to do with me? Ethan hesitated. Then, because you were part of it. The words hit like a train. Claire stared at him. What? Ethan's expression was unreadable. You were a child. One of the first generation born inside the experiment. But your parents, they got you out. They ran, wiped your records, gave you a new life. Her chest tightened. Memories flashed, the static on the old radio, the locked doors in her childhood home, the feeling that something had always been missing. But someone still remembers you, Ethan said. His voice was low, urgent. And now, they want you back. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. The gas station came into view, a single flickering light in the darkness. And standing under that light, a woman in a gray suit. Waiting, watching, a knowing smile on her lips. Claire stopped dead. The woman raised a phone to her ear. And the moment she did, Claire's vision blurred. Her knees buckled. The world spun. And then, everything went black. Darkness. The moment Claire collapsed outside the gas station, her world dissolved. There was no sound, no movement, just an eerie void, stretching endlessly around her. Her body felt like it was floating, detached from reality. Then, a voice. You were never supposed to wake up, Claire. Her eyes snapped open. Bright fluorescent lights burned overhead, their sterile glow casting harsh shadows against white-tiled walls. A hospital room. But something was wrong. The air smelled too clean, like chemicals and metal. The beeping of machines was too rhythmic, almost programmed. And she wasn't alone. A woman in a gray suit stood at the foot of the bed. The same woman from the gas station. Claire's pulse jumped. Where am I? She demanded, trying to sit up, but her body refused to move. The woman tilted her head. Somewhere safe. Claire's breath came sharp. No, this wasn't real. Her fingers twitched barely. She tried to lift her arm, but the muscles wouldn't respond. Panic surged. What did you do to me? The woman smiled. You're experiencing a lockdown response. It's a failsafe, implanted in all first-generation subjects. In case they ever tried to leave. Claire's stomach dropped. First-generation subjects. Her blood turned ice cold. You're lying, she whispered. The woman stepped closer, her heels clicking against the tile. Am I? Then she pressed a button on the monitor next to Claire's bed. Instantly, a wave of memories slammed into Claire's skull. Blurry, scattered images. A lab. A machine. People in white coats speaking in hushed voices. A child's voice, her own, screaming. Her chest heaved. It was real. All of it. Claire's childhood hadn't been erased, it had been reprogrammed. The woman watched as Claire gasped for breath, her body trembling against the restraints. You're starting to remember, she said, almost amused. Claire's teeth clenched. Who are you? A pause. Then, my name is Dr. Evelyn Shaw. The name rang vaguely familiar, like an echo from a dream. You were one of my first subjects, Evelyn continued. One of the best. Until your parents took you and ran. Claire's jaw tightened. She wasn't just part of the Blackwood Project. She was a prototype. Her mind was spinning, searching for an escape, a way out. Why am I still alive? She asked. Evelyn's lips curled. Because you have something we need, Claire. And I'm going to help you unlock it. A cold chill crawled up Claire's spine. She didn't trust Evelyn. Didn't trust a word of this. But there was one thing she did know. She had to get out. Before they made her something she couldn't escape from. Claire didn't have time to process. A loud alarm blared through the room, sending red warning lights flashing across the walls. Evelyn frowned, turning toward the monitor on the wall. She pressed a button. What's happening? A voice crackled through the intercom. Security breach. Subject 17 has escaped containment. Evelyn's expression darkened. Claire's pulse spiked. Subject 17? Who the hell was that? The emergency lights continued to pulse, casting the room in a blood-red glow. Claire saw her chance. She focused every ounce of strength on moving her hand, just enough to reach the needle in her fore. With a sharp jerk, she ripped it free. Pain shot up her arm, but she didn't stop. Evelyn turned just as Claire lunged, swinging the force stand like a weapon. The metal pole slammed into Evelyn's arm, knocking her back just enough for Claire to stumble to her feet. Her legs shook violently, the effects of the drug still heavy in her system. But she moved. The door was wide open. Guards had already run toward the security breach. She bolted, running into the unknown. The breakout. Pain. It tore through Claire's body like fire, her muscles weak and unresponsive. But she ran anyway. Barefoot. The cold tile burned against her soles. Red warning lights flashed overhead, throwing shifting shadows across the stark white hallway. I have to get out. Behind her, a loud crash echoed through the corridor, shouts, footsteps, chaos. The facility was in full lockdown. The guards weren't after her, they were after Subject 17. Who the hell was that? She rounded a corner, gripping the smooth wall for balance. Her hospital gown clung to her damp skin. Ahead, the corridor split in two, left or right. A sharp, distant scream, not human. Claire's blood ran cold. She took the right path without hesitation. A security checkpoint loomed ahead. A reinforced steel door with a biometric scanner. 2 guards were posted at the entrance, tense and gripping rifles. Claire's pulse spiked. No way around them. Her eyes darted, a vent. Small, cramped, but possible. She sprinted forward, dropping to her knees just as one of the guards turned. Hey! She launched herself into the vent, metal groaning beneath her weight. Bullets ripped through the air, sparking against the steel walls behind her. Claire crawled fast, her palms scraping against the surface. The vent sloped downward, turning into a chute, too steep to stop. She slid. The world spun, light disappearing into darkness. And then, she dropped. Falling, Claire hit the ground hard, knocking the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded through her ribs. She rolled onto her side, gasping, blinking up at the dim blue glow around her. She wasn't in a hallway anymore. This place was different. The air was colder, sterile yet decayed, like a place forgotten. Slowly, she pushed herself up, her body trembling. Rows of glass chambers lined the walls, stretching into the distance. Each one was filled with a strange, pale blue liquid. And inside them, people. Or at least, they had once been people. Their bodies were suspended, lifeless, their skin almost translucent. Electrodes clung to their heads. Their faces were twisted in expressions of agony, fear, surrender. Claire's stomach turned. This wasn't just an experiment. It was a graveyard. A quiet beep echoed behind her. She turned. A chamber was open. And it was empty. The air shifted. A presence. Behind her. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the chamber. Claire turned just in time to see a man step from the shadows. Tall. Unnaturally still. And his eyes were entirely black. Claire staggered back, heart hammering. The man didn't move. Didn't blink. His skin was sickly pale, his veins dark beneath the surface. His face was angular, symmetrical, almost too perfect, like something constructed rather than born. A slow, rasping inhale. You are like me. The word sent a shockwave through Claire's body. Like him? No. No, that was impossible. Her hands trembled, her mind racing. Who are you? The man's head tilted in that unsettling way. 17. Claire's stomach dropped. Subject 17. The escaped test subject. You knew me once, he said, voice eerily calm. Claire's chest tightened. No, she whispered. I don't even know who I am. 17 stepped forward. You will. The door behind Claire burst open. Ethan, bleeding, out of breath, gun in hand. His eyes locked on 17 and his entire body went rigid. Claire, Ethan said slowly, not looking at her. Get away from him. 17's head tilted again, but this time, his mouth curled into a smirk. Ethan Hale, he said. You are not supposed to be here. Claire turned to Ethan, confused, breathless. You know him? She demanded. Ethan's jaw clenched. I know what he is. 17 took a step closer. She is waking up, Ethan. You cannot stop it. Claire's head pounded. Waking up? A buzzing filled her skull, growing louder. Images flashed behind her eyes. A small white room, a woman's voice whispering her name. A symbol burned into her skin as a child. Claire gasped, gripping her head. Ethan grabbed her arm. Claire, listen to me. Don't let them in. 17's eyes darkened. It's too late. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Claire screamed. And the world broke apart. The world fractured. Claire's mind was being pulled apart, stretched, twisted, burned. She saw visions that weren't hers. A sterile room. A bright white spotlight overhead. A woman in a lab coat, whispering her name. She's the key. Another voice, deeper, urgent. If she remembers, we lose everything. Pain exploded behind her eyes. And then, silence. Claire snapped back into reality. Her body convulsed, her breath ragged. The ground beneath her was cold concrete, her fingers scraping against the rough surface. Her ears rang with static. For a split second, she didn't know where she was. Then, like a flood, it all came back. The underground lab. The tanks filled with lifeless bodies. 17. Ethan. The truth unraveling. Ethan's voice cut through the haze. Claire, stay with me. She gasped for air, her chest heaving. The moment her eyes locked on 17, she knew he wasn't human. Not entirely. His movements were too smooth, too calculated. His presence felt unnatural. And yet, something inside her recognized him. Claire staggered to her feet, still dizzy from whatever had happened. 17 stood a few feet away, watching her intensely. His black eyes weren't just staring at her, they were searching for something. Something inside her. She is waking up. His voice sent a chill down her spine. She wanted to run. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Something was missing in her past. Something important. And he knew what it was. Ethan moved first. With military precision, he drew his gun and fired 3 shots. The bullets hit 17's chest, but he didn't fall. Didn't even flinch. Claire watched in horror as the wounds closed instantly, like time itself had rewound. Jesus Christ, Ethan muttered. 17's lips curled into a smile. Still playing by old rules, Ethan? Before Ethan could react, 17 moved. Faster than humanly possible. In less than a second, he was right in front of Ethan, gripping his wrist like it was made of glass. Bullets won't stop me, 17 said calmly. You should know that by now. Then he squeezed. Ethan let out a cry of pain as his wrist snapped. Claire's body reacted on instinct. She grabbed a metal scalpel from a nearby table and drove it into 17's shoulder. The moment the blade pierced his skin, he froze. His entire body seized, his breathing ragged, his eyes going wild. Then, he stepped back, staring at her like he had seen a ghost. Claire didn't understand. And then he said it. You're one of us. The words hit Claire like a freight train. She felt her entire world tilt, because somewhere, deep inside her, she already knew. She wasn't just a victim of Blackwood. She was part of it. Claire's breath hitched. No, she whispered. That's not true. 17 just smiled. You don't remember yet, he said. But you will. The moment he said it, a wave of memory surged through her mind. A cold operating table. Needles piercing her skin. Numbers flashing on a screen. 17. 8. 23. A man in a lab coat saying, she's different from the others. Claire stumbled backward, her head spinning. Ethan grabbed her arm, steadying her. Claire, he said firmly. Look at me. She did. Barely. You're not like him, Ethan said. You're not a monster. 17 laughed. That's what they told you, isn't it? He tilted his head. Did you ever wonder why you survived, Claire? Why you don't remember your childhood? Why your parents ran? Claire felt sick. Because they erased you. 17 stepped closer, his voice softer now, almost sympathetic. They wiped your memory. Reprogrammed you. Just like the others. Claire's hands shook. No, she whispered. That's not possible. 17's eyes darkened. Then why do you have the same scars as me? Claire's heart stopped. 17 reached up, unbuttoning his shirt collar. And there, just beneath his collarbone, a small, circular scar, identical to the one on Claire's ribs. The world blurred. A lifetime of lies unraveling in an instant. And then, a single thought pierced through the chaos. What else have they hidden from me? Claire's mind was fracturing. The scar. The identical scar. It was real. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her fingers trembled against her ribs as she lifted the thin hospital gown, tracing the small circular mark just below her collarbone. 17 wasn't lying. She had been marked just like him. Her entire life, she had assumed it was just a birthmark. A surgical scar from an injury she couldn't remember. But now she knew better. Her memories had been rewritten. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her childhood, her past, even her identity, had been engineered. By them. By Blackwood. Her hands shook. No, she whispered, stepping back. I'm not like you. 17 didn't move. His black eyes stayed locked on hers. Then why are they still looking for you? He asked. His words sent a shockwave through Claire's body. You think you escaped them, Claire? 17's voice was low, almost mocking. You didn't. They let you go. Because they knew you'd come back. Her stomach lurched. Let her go. No, that wasn't possible. She had lived a normal life. She had gone to school, worked a job, had relationships. Nothing about her life was engineered. Was it? Her thoughts raced, connecting dots she had never questioned before. Why couldn't she remember anything before the age of 6? Why did her parents move constantly? Why did she always feel like something was missing? A shiver ran through her spine. Blackwood never lost track of her. They had been watching all along. And now they wanted her back. Ethan grabbed Claire's arm, forcing her to focus. Claire, listen to me, he said, his voice tight with urgency. We have to leave. Now. Claire blinked, snapping out of the haze. The alarms were still blaring. The facility was still in chaos. And they were out of time. 17 didn't move. He simply watched. You can run, Ethan, 17 said. But it won't change anything. Ethan's grip on Claire tightened. I'll take my chances. 17's gaze flickered toward Ethan's wrist, the one he had broken just minutes ago. Except now, it wasn't broken. Claire's breath caught. The bones should have been shattered, but the bruising was already fading. The swelling was gone. Ethan's fingers flexed. Perfectly fine. 17's smile widened. You're just like me, he murmured. Aren't you, Ethan? Claire stiffened. No. Ethan wasn't like 17. Was he? Ethan's jaw tensed. He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled Claire toward the exit. We're leaving. Claire felt a sudden wave of unease. She had known Ethan for 2 years. He had been the one to warn her about Blackwood, the one to help her escape tonight. But he had never mentioned knowing 17. Never mentioned Blackwood experiments. And now he was healing like one of them. Who the hell was Ethan Hale? The underground lab doors burst open, spilling them into a narrow metal hallway. Claire's pulse raced. They had to move. Had to get out. Ethan grabbed a gun from his belt and checked the ammo. We get to the surface, find a car, and a deafening explosion ripped through the air. The walls trembled. A security breach? No, this was something else. The lights flickered, casting shadows against the metallic walls. Claire's breath hitched. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not 17's. Someone else was coming. Ethan tensed, pulling Claire behind a steel column. His breathing was controlled, but his grip on the gun was too tight. He knew who was coming. A silhouette appeared at the end of the corridor. Tall, confident, dressed in a gray suit, crisp and clean. Dr. Evelyn Shaw. The woman from the gas station. The one who had been waiting for Claire. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped forward, unfazed by the chaos. Ethan lifted his gun. Stay back. Evelyn smirked. Really, Ethan? You know that won't work. Ethan didn't fire. Claire's pulse pounded. Evelyn turned her gaze toward Claire, sharp, assessing, almost proud. You lasted longer than we expected, she said. Claire's stomach churned. What do you want from me? She demanded. Evelyn exhaled, almost bored. Claire, you already know the answer to that. Claire shook her head. No, I don't. Evelyn took another step forward. Then let me make it simple. Her eyes darkened. You belong to us. Claire's vision blurred. The buzzing returned, louder this time, like static invading her mind. She stumbled, gripping the wall for support. Something was wrong. Ethan moved between them. Get away from her. Evelyn tilted her head. You're protecting her, she said, eyes locked on Ethan. How interesting. A pause. Then, a chilling smile. Does she even know what you did, Ethan? Ethan froze. Claire felt her stomach drop. Something in his expression changed. A flicker of guilt. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. What is she talking about? She whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Evelyn's smile widened. Oh, Claire, she murmured. You trusted him, didn't you? Claire's pulse roared in her ears. Evelyn's voice was smooth as glass. Ethan is the reason you don't remember. The air left Claire's lungs. No. She turned to Ethan, her voice shaking. Tell me she's lying. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. Claire felt the world tilt beneath her. Everything she thought she knew, everything was a lie. And Ethan Hale had been a part of it. The world tilted. Claire's breath came sharp, shallow. The cold steel walls of the underground facility felt too small, too suffocating. Ethan is the reason you don't remember. Evelyn's words hung in the air like poison. Claire turned to Ethan, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tell me she's lying, she whispered. Ethan stared at her. His jaw tightened. His fingers twitched on the gun. But he didn't deny it. Claire felt like she was falling, her entire reality fracturing. Her partner. Her ally. The only person she thought she could trust. He had been a part of it all along. You son of a bitch, she breathed. Ethan's expression darkened. Claire, listen to me. She stepped back. The distance between them suddenly felt like an ocean. You erased my memories, she whispered. You knew what they did to me, and you helped them? Ethan's grip tightened on the gun, but he didn't raise it. I had no choice, he said finally. Claire let out a hollow laugh. There's always a choice. Evelyn stepped forward, smirking. You really didn't figure it out, did you, Claire? Claire's blood ran cold. Figure what out, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Evelyn's smile widened. Who do you think Ethan was protecting? Claire's stomach dropped. Ethan shifted slightly, as if preparing for something. You weren't the only one, Claire, Evelyn said. And then, the truth hit her like a gunshot. Ethan hadn't been protecting Blackwood. He had been protecting someone else. Her. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. What? Blackwood wanted you dead, Evelyn continued, her eyes gleaming. But Ethan convinced them you were more valuable alive. Claire couldn't breathe. They were going to kill me? She whispered. Ethan's hands fisted at his sides. I stopped them. But you let them wipe my memory? Claire's voice broke. Ethan exhaled sharply. It was the only way to keep you alive. Claire felt sick. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a prison she had never even known she was in. And Ethan had been the one who locked the door. Everything around her felt distant, unreal. Ethan's betrayal should have felt like the worst part of all this. But it wasn't. The worst part was, a small, broken part of her still wanted to trust him. You're lying, she whispered. Ethan shook his head. I wish I was. Claire's mind raced. The scars. The erased past. The feeling that something was always missing. She thought she had escaped Blackwood. But the truth was worse. She had never escaped at all. Evelyn sighed, almost bored. Well, this has been fun, she said. But we have work to do. Claire's fists clenched. You're not taking me back. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Oh, Claire. She pulled a small device from her pocket. A silver switch. Then, she pressed it. Claire's body seized. A sharp, unbearable pain shot through her skull. She screamed, dropping to her knees as fire exploded behind her eyes. Stop. Ethan roared, lunging forward. Evelyn barely spared him a glance before lifting a gun and firing. A single silenced shot rang out. Ethan froze. Then, his body collapsed. Claire's heart stopped. No. Blood pooled beneath him. Ethan didn't move. Claire tried to reach for him, but her body wouldn't respond. The pain in her skull amplified, like 1,000 knives twisting through her mind. You were always the strongest, Evelyn murmured. But even you can't fight this. Claire's vision blurred. Her limbs went slack. And then, the world disappeared. When Claire opened her eyes, she was somewhere else. A white room. Silent. Sterile. A single chair in the center. And standing beside it, a man she didn't recognize. But somehow she knew him. He smiled. Welcome back, Claire. Her pulse spiked. We've been waiting for you. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. The man standing before her was tall, precise, calm. He wore a fitted black suit, flawless, like he had been sculpted from ice and shadow. And yet, his face was familiar. Her breath shuddered in her chest. Who are you? The man smiled. You don't remember me. Claire's body went cold. There was something about the way he said it. Like he knew something she didn't. Like he had been waiting for this moment. She clenched her fists. Why am I here? The man stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pristine white floor. You're here because you never left, he said. Claire's stomach twisted. What the hell does that mean? She snapped. The man's smile didn't falter. Tell me, Claire, what's the earliest memory you have? She froze. Her earliest memory? Her mind raced. Flashes of childhood. A house, a backyard, a birthday cake. But all of it was fuzzy, like an old photograph that had been tampered with. She tried to focus, to remember. And that's when she felt it. A gap. Not just missing time. Something wasn't there at all. Her chest tightened. What did you do to me? The man exhaled softly, almost sympathetically. We didn't do anything to you, Claire. He tilted his head. You did it to yourself. Her blood ran cold. No, that wasn't possible. She had been a victim. She had been hunted, controlled, erased. Hadn't she? Claire took a step back, shaking her head. You're lying. The man's eyes were calm, steady. Aren't you tired of everyone lying to you? She hesitated. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. You want to know the truth? The man asked. Claire swallowed hard. Then she nodded. The man's smile widened. Then let me show you what you forgot. The lights dimmed. A screen descended from the ceiling, seamless, smooth. A faint humming filled the air, something electronic, pulsing. And then, the images started. Surveillance footage. Claire's breath hitched. A lab. Bright, sterile. Rows of people in white coats moving through a massive research facility. And then, she saw herself. Claire's pulse spiked. She was in the footage. Walking through the lab like she belonged there. Wearing a Blackwood-issued security badge. Her own face stared back at her, cold, calculated. Like she had been in control. Claire's stomach twisted violently. No, this wasn't possible. She had been a prisoner. A victim. Hadn't she? Her fingernails dug into her palms. This is fake. The man didn't react. It's not. The footage continued. Claire, the Claire in the footage, was giving orders. Directing researchers. Examining monitors filled with brain scans. And then, a label appeared on the screen. Claire staggered backward. Subject 0. She wasn't one of the test subjects. She had been the first. The prototype. The architect of the program itself. Her chest caved in. No, she whispered. That's not me. The man sighed. I told you. You did this to yourself. Claire's legs felt weak. The white room, the man, the footage, it was all collapsing in on her. Her mind was a battlefield. She couldn't be one of them. She couldn't have helped them. Then why did it feel true? She clenched her jaw. You erased my memory. The man folded his hands in front of him. Yes, she swallowed hard. Why? Because you asked us to. A cold, suffocating silence. Claire's ears rang. What? The man took another step closer. You weren't just involved in Blackwood, he said. You created the program. You ran the research. You designed the experiments. He tilted his head. But then, something changed. Claire's stomach turned. You found out what we were really doing. The man's voice was smooth, calm, final. And you couldn't live with it. The truth ripped through her like shrapnel. Claire's breath came in shaky gasps. She had created the very thing she feared. She had been a part of it until she betrayed them. And now they wanted her back. Because there was one last thing missing. Something still locked inside her mind. Something she had erased herself. Her knees buckled. Why did I do it? She whispered. The man's expression was neutral, almost amused. You tell me, he said. Claire's pulse pounded. There was only one way to find out. She had to remember everything. And if she did, it would either set her free or destroy her completely. Claire's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room felt too small, too bright, too fake. You're lying, she whispered. The man in the suit, the one who knew too much, who felt too familiar, just smiled. You've said that before, he murmured. Every time you start remembering. Claire's stomach churned. She was shaking, but she wasn't sure if it was fear or rage. She had created Blackwood's experiments? She had run the program? No, that wasn't possible. She had been hunted, tortured, erased. She had spent her life running from them. How could she have been one of them? The man sighed, stepping closer. Let me ask you something, he said. If you were truly an innocent victim, why did you erase your own mind? Claire froze. The question hit like a bullet to the chest. She had spent so long hating Blackwood, blaming them, fearing them. But now the real enemy might be herself. Her knees felt weak. What the hell did I do? The screen behind her flickered. More footage. Claire turned instinctively. She wasn't ready. But it was too late. The screen showed a new date. 5 years ago. Claire was there, in the footage, standing in a Blackwood laboratory, staring down at something. Her hands were shaking. A voice crackled over the speakers. Dr. Vale, we need you to authorize the next phase. Claire staggered backward. Dr. Vale. The name hit her like an electric shock. Not Claire Vale. Not Claire the fugitive. Not Claire the victim. Dr. Claire Vale. The scientist. The one who created everything. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She hadn't just worked for Blackwood. She had been one of their top researchers. And then, she had tried to destroy them. The footage continued. Claire, the past version of herself, was shaking. This isn't right, she said, her voice tight with fear. A man stood beside her. A shadowy figure, his face turned away from the camera. You know what happens if you stop now, he said, his voice eerily calm. They'll kill you. They'll erase you. Past Claire shook her head. We went too far. The man sighed. Claire. I don't care. Her past self's eyes burned with something fierce. I won't be a part of this. Then, she pulled something from her pocket. A small device. A memory drive. She wasn't just walking away. She was stealing something. Claire's breath hitched. The camera zoomed in. A label flashed on the screen. Project Echo. The final phase of the Blackwood program. And Claire had taken it. The man in the suit watched her carefully. You remember now, don't you? He said softly. Claire couldn't breathe. Project Echo. The one thing she had taken from Blackwood before she ran. The one thing they still wanted. And she had erased her own memory to protect it. But there was just one problem. She had no idea where it was. Claire's hands curled into fists. Where is it? She demanded. The man's smile was almost amused. You already know, he said. Claire's pulse spiked. No, that was impossible. If she knew where it was, she would have. Her chest tightened. Unless she didn't just erase the memory. She hid it. Somewhere inside herself. Her breathing went shallow. And suddenly, she understood. Project Echo wasn't a file. It wasn't on a hard drive. It was inside her mind. It was the missing piece. And now, they were going to take it from her. The doors behind her slid open. 2 men stepped inside. White uniforms. expressionless faces. Evelyn Shaw followed them, her heels clicking against the floor. Claire's pulse pounded. "You were never going to let me leave, were you?" she whispered. Evelyn smiled. "No." The man in the suit, the one who had told her the truth, didn't move. He simply watched. Because his job was already done. Claire backed away. "You can't do this." Evelyn nodded to the guards. "Prepare the procedure," she said. The guards stepped forward. Claire lashed out, trying to fight, but her body refused to move. Something was wrong. Her muscles locked up. Her limbs felt like lead. Evelyn sighed. "The moment you woke up here, we activated your failsafe." Claire's chest constricted. "Failsafe," she choked out. "You programmed it yourself," Evelyn said smoothly. "In case you ever tried to resist." Claire's stomach dropped. She had done this to herself. And now they were taking back what was theirs. Her vision blurred. The guards grabbed her arms, strapped her into the chair. The man in the suit finally spoke. "Don't fight it, Claire." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Because the last time she had heard those words, she had been the one saying them. Claire's body refused to move. The straps around her wrists and ankles tightened, locking her into the sleek white chair. The air was cold, humming with hidden electricity. Evelyn Shaw stood beside her, fingers lightly tapping a glass tablet. A screen above flickered to life, displaying brainwave patterns. "Do you know what's about to happen?" Evelyn asked, her voice eerily calm. Claire's pulse pounded. "You're going to steal Project Echo from my mind," she whispered. Evelyn's lips curved slightly. "Not steal," she corrected. "Recover." The guards adjusted the electrodes on Claire's temples, their movements mechanical, detached. She struggled against the straps, but her body refused to listen. The failsafe. She had done this to herself. Designed her own trap. And now, they were about to rip open her mind and take what they wanted. Evelyn sighed. "You've been running for so long, Claire. Don't you want this to be over?" Claire's jaw tightened. She refused to answer. Because there was one thing Evelyn didn't know. Claire had spent years hiding Project Echo in her mind. But she had also spent years learning how to fight back. They thought she was helpless. They were wrong. The moment the machine activated, Claire felt it. A sharp, stabbing pressure behind her eyes. Her memories weren't just opening. They were being shattered. The room around her flickered. And suddenly, she wasn't in the chair anymore. She was somewhere else. Inside her own mind. A long, empty corridor stretched in front of her. White, sterile. Doors lined the walls, each one locked. This was it. The place where she had hidden Project Echo. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, and her heart stopped. A man stood in the distance, watching her. Not the man in the suit. Not Ethan. Someone else. His face was blurred, shifting like static. But Claire knew, instinctively, deep in her bones, this was the person she had been running from. The real enemy. And he was already inside her mind. Claire staggered backward. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man tilted his head. His voice was smooth, unsettlingly familiar. "You don't remember me?" Claire's chest tightened. No, that wasn't possible. She didn't know him. She had never seen him before. Had she? He took a step forward. The corridor around them shimmered, glitching like a corrupted video. "You buried the truth, Claire," he said softly. "But you left me behind." The walls started closing in. The doors creaked open, revealing fragments of memories she wasn't ready to face. And in that moment, Claire realized the truth. This man wasn't just inside her mind. He was a part of it. The missing piece of herself she had erased. And now he wanted out. Claire's pulse roared. The figure stepped closer, his form flickering like a broken transmission. "You hid me here," he murmured. "You locked me away." Her throat went dry. "No," she whispered. But the memories were flooding back now. She hadn't just erased Project Echo. She had erased herself. The person she used to be, the scientist, the mastermind, the one who had built Blackwood, was still inside her. Buried. Waiting. And now she was waking up. The man smiled. time to remember Claire. And then, the world exploded. Claire's body jolted. The machine's alarms blared as the brain scan spiked, screens flickering wildly. "Something's wrong," one of the technicians shouted. Evelyn frowned. "What's happening?" Claire's breathing was ragged. The guards moved toward her, but then she snapped the straps like they were nothing. The failsafe was gone. The old Claire was back. And she wasn't their prisoner anymore. The moment Claire's mind unlocked, everything changed. The restraints on her wrists and ankles snapped like paper. The guards, trained killers, emotionless enforcers of Blackwood, froze. They had expected her to be trapped, helpless. But the Claire who had woken up in that chair was not the same woman they had captured. This Claire remembered. Her mind wasn't broken anymore. She had built the machine they had just tried to use against her. And now, she was about to turn it back on them. Evelyn took a step back. For the first time, she looked afraid. "Impossible," she murmured. Claire lifted her gaze, and something shifted in the room. She wasn't just seeing the present anymore. She was seeing everything. Blackwood's lies. The real purpose of Project Echo. The truth they had buried deep inside her. Her eyes flickered toward the monitors. The brain scan showed something that shouldn't exist. A consciousness running in 2 layers. 2 minds. 2 Claires. The one she had been. And the one she had become. The guards moved in, weapons raised. Claire smiled. They had no idea what was coming. The first guard lunged fast, precise. Claire's body moved before her mind even processed it. She stepped aside effortlessly, twisting his arm backward, a motion she shouldn't have known how to do. But the old Claire knew. His shoulders snapped out of place. He screamed. Another guard aimed a tranquilizer. Claire's fingers found the scalpel on the tray. Before the guard could react, she threw it. The blade buried itself into his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. 2 down. The third one hesitated. Claire turned to him. "Run." He did. Evelyn stood perfectly still. She wasn't afraid of death. She was afraid of something far worse. "Do you even know what you are now?" she asked softly. Claire took a step forward. "Yes." The alarms blared, flashing red emergency lights. A voice crackled over the speakers. "Lock down the facility. Do not let Subject Zero escape." Claire grinned. They still thought they were in control. But they weren't. She moved. Faster than she thought was possible. Her mind was calculating every exit, every blind spot, every single weakness in Blackwood's defenses. She had built this place. Now, she was going to burn it down. She snatched a gun from the fallen guard, checking the chamber. Full clip. Perfect. Evelyn watched her, smiling faintly. "You're not running anymore," she said. Claire cocked the gun. "No," she agreed. "I'm hunting." Claire knew she had 3 minutes. That was how long it would take Blackwood's strike teams to reach this level. She sprinted through the corridors, her body adjusting effortlessly to the movements. She wasn't just remembering. She was becoming. But something felt off. Someone was watching her. Not through the cameras. Something else. A presence. Something she couldn't explain. Then a whisper. "You finally woke up." Claire froze. The voice was inside her head. Her hands tightened on the gun. She turned, but no one was there. "We're not done yet, Claire." The voice was hers. Or at least, it used to be. And then, the world around her flickered. Reality itself began to shift. Claire's vision blurred. For a moment, she wasn't in the corridor anymore. She was somewhere else. A research lab. And in front of her, a child. A little girl, no older than 6. Dark hair. Bright, piercing eyes. Claire's heart stopped. She knew this child. But it was impossible. The girl looked up at her, confused. "Are you my mother?" Claire's chest caved in. The memory shattered apart. She was back in the corridor, gasping for breath. And suddenly, she understood why she erased her memories. Claire's lungs burned. The memory had lasted only a few seconds, but it had felt real. Too real. A little girl. Dark hair. Bright, piercing eyes. "Are you my mother?" Claire's pulse roared in her ears. No, that wasn't possible. She had never had a child. Had she? Her stomach twisted violently. She had spent years thinking she was a victim of Blackwood. What if she had been wrong? What if Blackwood had taken something from her that she didn't even remember losing? Her fingers tightened around the gun. She needed to get out. Now. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead of her. Blackwood's alarms blared in the distance. Footsteps. Closing in. The strike teams were coming. She moved fast, her body adapting instinctively because the old Claire knew this facility inside out. She took a left. Vaulted over a railing. The emergency stairwell was ahead. And then, the world glitched. The walls shimmered, flickering like static. And suddenly, she wasn't in the corridor anymore. She was in another memory. A cold operating room. And strapped to the table. The child. Claire's breath caught. The little girl looked up at her, eyes wide. Please, she whispered. Don't let them take me. Claire's heart shattered. And then, the memory was gone. She was back in the corridor, gasping for air. Her fingers dug into her temples. What the hell is happening to me? The whispers in her mind grew louder. She had buried the truth for a reason. And now it was clawing its way back. The stairwell was in front of her. If she could get outside, she had a chance. She kicked open the metal door and ran straight into two Blackwood agents. Guns raised. Claire moved without thinking. She ducked, swept the legs out from the first agent. He hit the ground hard. The second agent fired. Claire twisted, the bullet whizzing past her ear. She grabbed his wrist, turned the gun back on him. A single shot. The agent collapsed. Claire's chest heaved. She had spent years running from Blackwood. Now, she was cutting them down like they were nothing. She was starting to wonder, was this who she had always been? The door to her right burst open. More agents. Claire turned to run. And a sharp pain exploded at the base of her skull. A stun baton. Electricity ripped through her nerves. Her body locked up, and she collapsed to the floor. Everything faded to black. Claire woke up strapped to a chair. Again. But this time, something was different. The air was colder. The room wasn't white. It was black. Dark screens lined the walls, their surfaces pulsing with coded data. And in front of her, the man in the suit. The same man from before. The one who had told her the truth. Or at least his version of it. Welcome back, Claire, he said softly. Her jaw tightened. Who are you? The man smiled faintly. I think you already know. Claire's fingers curled into fists. He was right. She did. She just didn't want to say it. Because if she was right, then the man standing in front of her was the same man from her memory. The one who had stood beside her in the lab. The one she had trusted. The one who had helped create Project Echo. You were my partner, Claire whispered. The man's expression didn't change. Yes, he said. Claire's stomach twisted. She had helped build the very thing she was trying to destroy. She had helped create the nightmare. And she had erased herself to forget. The screens flickered, lines of data scrolling endlessly. Project Echo was never about mind control, the man said. Claire stared at the screen. The files were declassified records. Names. Dates. Experiments. And then, something that made her blood run cold. A list of people. Hundreds of names. Next to each one, a single word. Erased. Claire's chest tightened. This was never about me, she whispered. The man's voice was calm. No, Claire, he said. It was about all of them. Her pulse roared. Project Echo wasn't about altering one person's memory. It was about rewriting reality. Erasing entire lives. And Claire had been the first test subject. She had erased herself. Because she had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. And now, Blackwood was about to do it again. Claire's hands trembled as she stared at the list on the screen. Hundreds of names. People who had been erased from history. She swallowed hard. What is this? The man in the suit, her former partner, the one she had once trusted, watched her carefully. This is what Project Echo was really built for, he said. Not mind control. Not intelligence gathering. He gestured toward the screen. This is the record of every person whose existence has been erased. Claire's stomach twisted. The names kept scrolling. Doctors, journalists, scientists, whistleblowers, people who had known something they weren't supposed to. Claire's own name was on the list, right next to a single word. Incomplete. Her blood ran cold. She had erased herself. But something had gone wrong. Something had been left behind. And now, Blackwood wanted to finish the job. Claire's breath shook. Her memories were unlocking, piece by piece. But there was still one missing. One final piece of the puzzle. And she knew, if she found it, there was no going back. The man in the suit sighed. We don't have much time. Claire's jaw clenched. Then stop talking and show me. The screen flickered. A new file appeared. A single video. Dated 5 years ago. Labeled, Final Protocol. Her finger hovered over the play button. And then, she pressed it. The video began. The screen showed a lab. Claire saw herself, the past version of herself. Standing in the middle of the room, her arms crossed. A voice played over the speakers. Dr. Vale, do you understand what you're about to do? Past Claire nodded. Yes. The camera panned left. To a second chair. To the little girl strapped to it. Claire's heart stopped. The child from her memory. The one who had called her mother. Past Claire's eyes burned with something fierce. This has to stop, she said. I won't let you erase her. The camera zoomed in. On the child's face. And that's when Claire saw it. The scar. The same one she had. In the exact same place. Her entire world shattered. The little girl wasn't just a test subject. She was Claire. Claire staggered backward. No, she whispered. That's not. Her throat closed up. Because she knew it was true. 5 years ago, she had been erased. Not metaphorically. Literally. Blackwood hadn't just wiped her memories. They had split her in two. A child, the original Claire Vale. And the woman she had become, the rewritten version. A new Claire. One they could control. She had been experimenting on herself. And now, she was finally remembering. The man in the suit watched her carefully. You see now, don't you? He said softly. Claire's pulse pounded. I was the first subject, she whispered. The man nodded. You were Project Echo's prototype. Claire felt sick. She had spent her life thinking she was running from them. But in reality, she had been running from herself. Her mind had been rewritten, broken, erased. And now, Blackwood wanted to finish the job. To make sure she never remembered the truth. Her fingers curled into fists. No, she breathed. She had spent too long being a puppet. It was time to burn it all down. The alarms blared. Blackwood's forces were coming. They knew she had remembered. They wouldn't let her leave alive. Claire grabbed the gun from the table. She turned to the man in the suit. Are you with me? He smiled. Always. Then, they moved. Claire wasn't running anymore. She was fighting back. And when this was over, Blackwood would never erase anyone again. The alarm screamed through the facility. Claire moved like lightning. Not because she was trained, but because she had trained them. Every guard. Every soldier. Every scientist working for Blackwood. She had built their world. And now, she was here to burn it down. The man in the suit moved beside her, silent and precise. They weren't sneaking. They weren't hiding. They were walking straight into the heart of the enemy. Because for the first time, Claire wasn't afraid. She had spent her life believing she was the hunted. But the truth was she was the hunter. The strike teams arrived first. Heavy boots. Tactical gear. Weapons raised. Hold your fire, one of them shouted. We need her alive. Claire smirked. Wrong move. She dropped to the floor, grabbing a fallen soldier's weapon. And fired. One shot. Straight to the security panel. The doors behind the strike team slammed shut, locking them in. The emergency gas poured from the ceiling, knocking them out in seconds. Claire stood, stepping over their bodies. She turned to the man in the suit. That's one way to handle it, he murmured. Claire loaded a fresh clip. We don't have time to play nice. The doors ahead slid open. A dimly lit chamber. And inside, Evelyn Shaw, standing behind a massive screen, watching them. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even surprised. You finally made it, Evelyn said, smiling faintly. Claire lifted the gun. Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you. Evelyn sighed. Because I'm the only one who knows what's really coming. The man in the suit froze. Claire's pulse spiked. Evelyn's eyes locked onto Claire's. You think this is about Blackwood? She said. It's not. She gestured toward the screen. It flickered to life. And Claire saw something that stopped her heart. Live footage. Not of Blackwood. Not of a lab. Not of a single location. But of the entire world. Hundreds of cameras. Thousands of people. And next to each person's face, a single word. Erased. Claire's breath caught. It wasn't just her. Blackwood hadn't just experimented on her. They had been erasing people for years. Not hundreds. Not thousands. Millions. And Project Echo was about to wipe out even more. Claire's vision blurred. This, she whispered. This is impossible. Evelyn tilted her head. Is it? Claire staggered forward. They're wiping people's memories? Evelyn smiled. Not just memories. She stepped aside, revealing a countdown on the screen. 3 minutes left. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. What happens when it hits 0? The man in the suit tensed. Evelyn's smile widened. The world forgets itself. Claire's stomach twisted. You're lying. Evelyn gestured toward the screen. I told you, Claire. You were the first test subject. The prototype. The one who made all of this possible. Her voice softened. You were never meant to remember. None of us were. Claire shook her head. No, that's not. And then, a single gunshot. Claire's body locked up. For a moment, she didn't understand. Until she felt the burning pain in her side. She turned. And the man in the suit was holding the gun, pointed at her. He shot her. Claire staggered back, blood pooling from her wound. Her vision blurred. The man in the suit, her former partner, the one who had led her here, stared at her with cold eyes. You were getting too close, he said softly. Claire gasped for air. No, she whispered. But deep down, she knew. The betrayal was real. Evelyn smirked. You really thought he was here to help you? Claire's mind reeled. She had trusted him. He had saved her life. But all along, he had been leading her to this moment. You were the final test, Claire, he said. The last piece of the puzzle. His gun pressed against her chest. You were never meant to survive this. The countdown ticked lower. Claire's body was failing. And then, the alarms blared again. The facility shook. The power cut out. And somewhere in the distance, a voice whispered in Claire's mind. I remember now. Claire's eyes widened. Because she recognized the voice. It wasn't hers. It was the other Claire. The one she had erased. And now she was coming back. The alarm screamed. The world shook as the facility plunged into chaos. But Claire didn't hear any of it. Because inside her head, another voice was waking up. I remember everything. Her own voice. But not her. The first Claire. The one who had been erased. The one who had been here all along, buried deep inside her mind. And now she wanted control. Claire's knees buckled. The pain in her side burned, but it was nothing compared to the feeling of her own consciousness splitting apart. 2 Claires. 2 minds. 1 body. Who gets to survive? The gun pressed against her chest. The man in the suit, her former partner, the one who had betrayed her, watched her carefully. He was waiting for her to break. Waiting for her to lose the fight against herself. Evelyn Shaw stood behind him, smiling faintly. Let it happen, Claire, she said softly. You were never meant to exist. Claire gritted her teeth. The other Claire, the one she had erased, was trying to take control. You stole my life, the voice whispered. And now I'm taking it back. The pressure in Claire's head intensified. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred. If she didn't stop this, she was going to disappear. Just like all the others. Just like Blackwood wanted. No. She wasn't going to let them win. Not Blackwood. Not Evelyn. Not even herself. With a burst of strength, Claire snapped forward. She grabbed the man's wrist, twisting the gun away, and fired. Point blank. The bullet slammed into his shoulder. He staggered back, eyes wide. Claire didn't stop. She kicked the gun from his grip, dropped low, and drove her elbow into his ribs. His body crashed to the floor. Evelyn took a step back. For the first time, she looked afraid. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You can't win this." Claire turned to the countdown clock. 1 minute and 47 seconds. She had less than 2 minutes before Project Echo wiped out millions of people. She needed a plan. Fast. Claire's mind raced. How do you stop a program designed to erase memories? She had built Echo. She had designed the code. Which meant she knew how to overwrite it. But there was only one way. She had to replace Project Echo with something stronger. A memory that couldn't be erased. A memory so powerful, so deeply embedded, that it would overwrite the system itself. And there was only one memory that fit. Her original self. The first Claire. The Claire who had been erased. She had to let her back in. The facility trembled. The countdown hit 40 seconds. Evelyn's breath hitched. "You're running out of time," she warned. Claire's hands moved fast over the console. She wasn't stopping Echo. She was rewriting it. Line after line of code, overriding the neural commands, replacing them with the original Claire's consciousness. The first Claire wasn't going to erase her. She was going to merge with her. The two versions of Claire, becoming one. The program fought back. Red warning screens flashed. The system tried to lock her out. But Claire was faster. She hit enter. The countdown froze. And then, the world went white. The light faded. Claire gasped. She was still standing. Still alive. Her mind was different now. Two versions of herself, now one. She remembered everything. Not just what Blackwood had done to her. Not just what she had built. But who she really was. Evelyn's face went pale. "Impossible," she whispered. Claire turned to her. And smiled. "You wanted me to remember?" she said. "Well, I do." Evelyn stepped back. Because for the first time, Claire wasn't just a test subject. She was the first, the last, and the only one who had ever beaten them. And she was done playing their game. The sirens howled. The emergency lights strobed against the walls. Blackwood was collapsing. Claire stood in the center of the control room, her hands still on the keyboard. The countdown was gone. Project Echo was overwritten. She had won. Or so she thought. Evelyn staggered back, staring at the flashing monitors. "You think this is over?" she whispered. Claire lifted the gun. Yes! She pulled the trigger. A single shot, straight to Evelyn's chest. Evelyn collapsed to the floor. She wasn't getting back up. Claire exhaled sharply. She had been waiting for that moment for years. But as she turned toward the exit, something felt off. The war wasn't over yet. Something was still coming. Something big. And she wasn't ready for it. The screens glitched. Static filled the air. Claire froze. A voice echoed through the speakers. "You think you killed Blackwood?" Her blood ran cold. Because the voice wasn't Evelyn's. It wasn't the man in the suit. It wasn't anyone she knew. It was hers. Another version of herself. Another Claire. The monitors flickered, showing a live feed. A facility. Not Blackwood. Something bigger. And inside it, hundreds of people. All strapped into chairs. All wired into machines. Their eyes wide, blank. They never needed Project Echo. They were already running something bigger. Claire's chest caved in. The truth hit her like a gunshot. Blackwood was just a test run. The real project was still happening. And it was so much worse. Claire's hands shook. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Her voice continued. Echo wasn't the final phase. It was the beginning. The real project is called Liminal. Claire's heart stopped. She knew that name. Somewhere deep in her subconscious, she had heard it before. Liminal. She had built that too. And she had erased it from her mind. The video feed zoomed in. The people strapped to the machines weren't random subjects. They were people from the erase list. Journalists. Scientists. Politicians. People who had been wiped from history. They weren't dead. They were here. And their minds were still trapped. Liminal wasn't about erasing people. It was about rewriting them. Reprogramming their identities. Turning them into something else. And Claire had helped build it. A soft click echoed behind her. Claire spun around and stared down the barrel of a gun. Her breath caught. The man holding it was Ethan. Alive, bleeding, and aiming straight at her. Claire's mind reeled. She had thought he was dead. She had thought he was on her side. But now she wasn't so sure. Ethan, she whispered. His face was blank. Emotionless. You weren't supposed to find out, he said softly. Claire's pulse pounded. Liminal, she breathed. You knew. Ethan's jaw tightened. I didn't just know, Claire. His voice was cold. I helped create it. The floor dropped out from under her. She had thought she was fighting Blackwood. She had thought Ethan had been protecting her. But all along, he had been protecting Liminal. And now, he was here to stop her. Claire stared at the gun. The weight of everything hit her all at once. She had spent years fighting for the truth. She had spent years trying to remember. And now that she had, she wished she hadn't. Because the real war wasn't over. Liminal was still active. Millions of people were still trapped. And Ethan, the only person she had ever trusted, was about to kill her. Claire exhaled. You're not going to shoot me, she said. Ethan's grip tightened. Try me. Claire took a step forward. You need me, Ethan. Her voice was steady. Cold. You can't run Liminal without me. Ethan's eye twitched. And Claire knew she was right. Blackwood was gone. But Liminal was still in play. And she was the only one who knew how to stop it. Or how to make it even stronger. You have a choice, Claire whispered. Kill me. Or let me finish what I started. Ethan's breath slowed. For a single second, he hesitated. And that was all Claire needed. She moved. Faster than him. She grabbed the barrel of the gun, twisted it away. Ethan fired. The bullet whizzed past her ear. Claire slammed her elbow into his ribs. He staggered back. She grabbed the gun, turned it back on him. And this time, she didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed. Ethan staggered back, clutching his side. Blood soaked through his shirt. Claire held her breath. She had shot him. But she hadn't killed him. Ethan's legs buckled, and he collapsed against the console, his breathing ragged. You should have aimed for the head, he muttered. Claire didn't blink. I wasn't trying to kill you, she said. Ethan gave a weak smirk. Could have fooled me. Claire stepped forward, keeping the gun trained on him. You lied to me, she said. This entire time. Ethan's jaw tightened. I was protecting you. Protecting me? Claire's voice was ice. You tried to erase me. Ethan met her eyes. You don't understand, he said. Liminal isn't just another project. It's not something you can destroy. Claire's grip on the gun tightened. Then what is it? She demanded. Ethan took a shaky breath. It's already inside you. Claire froze. What? Ethan coughed, his hand still pressed against his wound. You think Liminal is just a facility, he said. A room full of people strapped into machines? Claire didn't answer. Because deep down, she already knew what he was about to say. You were the first subject, Claire, Ethan continued. Not for Echo. For Liminal. The air left her lungs. Her ears rang. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper now. Liminal isn't just a memory wipe. It's a way to rewrite who you are. Claire's vision blurred. You're lying, she whispered. But the voice inside her head said otherwise. I remember everything. The voice, the other Claire, the one she erased. She had never been two different people. She had been rewritten. Again, and again, and again, until she was whoever Blackwood needed her to be. The perfect soldier. The perfect scientist. The perfect weapon. And now she had finally woken up. Claire's mind raced. If what Ethan was saying was true, then she had never escaped. She had never been free. She had been reset. Over, and over, and over. And now she was running out of time. Because there was one last failsafe. If a liminal subject ever remembered too much, they were programmed to erase themselves. Claire's pulse spiked. Her own body, her own mind, was going to betray her. Unless she found liminal. And burned it down. Claire pulled out her tablet. She had one chance to find the real liminal facility. The place where the resets happened. The place where she had been erased. She hacked into Blackwood's emergency servers. Ethan watched her, breathing heavily. "You're making a mistake," he rasped. Claire ignored him. She was done trusting anyone but herself. The files loaded. One single location. Coordinates. Washington, D.C. Claire's breath hitched. Not some hidden lab in the mountains. Not an abandoned facility underground. Liminal was in the heart of the U.S. government. And Claire was going straight to it. 12 hours later, Claire stood outside a sleek, unmarked skyscraper in the middle of Washington, D.C. It didn't look like a government building. It looked normal. But it wasn't. This was where they reset people. Where they had erased her. And she was walking straight into it. She pressed a hand to her earpiece. "Are you in position?" A voice crackled through. "Copy that. Ready when you are." Claire's chest tightened. The voice belonged to Ethan. She had saved him. Now, he was going to help her finish this. Or betray her again. Either way, this was where it ended. Claire took a breath. And walked into liminal. Claire stepped into the skyscraper. It was too clean. Too quiet. Not like Blackwood. Not like a prison. It looked normal. Which meant it was far more dangerous. Ethan's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Security is light. They're not expecting you." Claire moved through the lobby. Every instinct screamed this was a trap. But she didn't care. She wasn't leaving without answers. And if this was where they had erased her, then this was where she would remember. Claire followed the coordinates on her tablet. An elevator ride. A hallway that looked exactly like every other hallway. Until she reached a door with no label. No markings. Just a single biometric scanner. She pressed her hand against it. A soft beep. The doors slid open. Inside. A dark room. No lights. No sound. Just a single chair in the center. And a screen in front of it. Waiting for her. Ethan's voice came through her earpiece. "Claire, whatever you do, don't sit down." But Claire already was. Because she knew. This was where it all started. And if she wanted the truth, this was where she would find it. The screen flickered to life. A soft, robotic voice spoke. "Welcome back, Dr. Vale." Claire's fingers curled into fists. She knew that name. Her real name. But she wasn't Dr. Claire Vale anymore. Was she? A file loaded onto the screen. A single document. Labeled, Subject 0, Claire Vale. She clicked it open. And what she saw stopped her heart. The file wasn't about her. It was about every version of her. Claire Vale wasn't one person. She was a program. A template. A designed identity. She scrolled through the file, her hands shaking. Lines of data. Dates. Experiments. Every version of Claire Vale, created, erased, and rebuilt. She wasn't the first Claire. She was the latest. The 12th. Her vision blurred. 12 iterations. 12 resets. Every Claire before you served their purpose until they were erased. Her breath came fast, shallow. She wasn't a survivor. She was the next test. And she had never been the original. The first Claire Vale had died years ago. And now it was her turn. A video file played. A recording from years ago. The screen showed a woman. Not her, but another Claire Vale. The original. The real Dr. Claire Vale. And she was staring directly at the camera. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I'm dead." Claire's pulse pounded. "And that means you're the next one." The woman, the real Claire Vale, exhaled slowly. "I built Liminal. I built this entire system. And then, I became its first victim." Claire shook her head. "They replaced me. They built you, designed you, to think you were me. But you're not. You never were." The video glitched. The original Claire leaned forward. "But listen to me. You're the last one. They won't need another after you. Because you're going to end this." The screen cut to static. Claire's breath was gone. She wasn't the first. She wasn't even the real Claire Vale. She was just the latest copy. And when her job was done, they were going to erase her, too. Ethan's voice shouted through her earpiece. Claire, get out of there. She wasn't listening. Because she knew what she had to do. She had spent years fighting for her past. But now, she was fighting for her future. Liminal had built her. And now, she was going to destroy it. She pulled up the system mainframe. The entire liminal database. Every iteration. Every experiment. Every memory they had stolen. It was all here. And with a single keystroke, she could erase it. Not her. Not just one Claire. All of them. The entire system. Gone. Ethan's voice came through again. Claire, think about this. But she already had. She had spent her entire life being someone else's version of Claire Vale. And now she was going to be free. Claire's finger hovered over the enter key. She had one final choice. Erase herself. Or rewrite the system. And become something new. Claire's finger hovered over the keyboard. One keystroke. One final command. And Liminal would be gone. Every experiment. Every erased life. Every Claire before her. Her breath came slow, steady. She had spent years trying to escape the system. Trying to remember who she was. But now she understood. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just another erased memory. She was the last Claire Vale. The one who had made it to the end. And that meant she had one last choice. Ethan's voice crackled through her earpiece. Claire, don't do this. She ignored him. She wasn't running anymore. She was becoming. Her finger pressed the key. And the system began to rewrite. But not how Ethan expected. Not how anyone expected. Because Claire Vale didn't destroy Liminal. She took control. The alarms blared. Every file, every record, every erased mind. All of it began merging. Claire felt the system folding around her. Liminal wasn't a place. It wasn't a program. It was a consciousness. A network of rewritten minds, all connected. And now she was in the center of it. Ethan's breath caught. Claire, what did you do? Her voice was calm. I fixed it. Because for the first time, Claire Vale wasn't someone else's creation. She was the architect. She had rewritten Liminal's core code. And now she controlled everything. The world shifted. Across the planet, millions of people who had been erased woke up. Memories they had lost came rushing back. Governments, corporations, Blackwood, all their secrets were exposed. The world was never going to be the same. And Claire? She wasn't part of the system anymore. She was the system. Her consciousness had merged with every erased person. She could see them, hear them. And with a single thought, she could rewrite anything. Ethan's voice was shaking. Claire, you didn't just stop Liminal. You became it. Claire smiled. For the first time in her life, she was free. Because she wasn't just one Claire Vale anymore. She was all of them. Every erased mind. Every forgotten life. She was the memory of the entire world. And now, she was rewriting history. Epilogue. The ghost in the machine. No one ever saw Claire Vale again. At least, not in the way they expected. Governments collapsed. Secrets unraveled. And a new presence emerged online. A consciousness. A voice. People called it a ghost. A legend. The whisper of something bigger. Something that knew everything. Because Claire Vale never died. She simply became something else. And whenever the world tried to erase the truth again, she was there. Watching. Waiting. Remembering. Because now, Claire Vale was history itself. The end.